Long before written records, before names, dates, and borders, there is a stretch of human time that remains quiet. In that silence, questions gather. How did complex societies appear so early? Why do similar structures rise on distant continents? And what was lost before history began keeping count? Tonight's documentary moves slowly through one of the most enduring ideas formed in that silence. The idea that before Egypt, before Mesopotamia, before the pyramids and temples we recognize, there may have been something else. Not a myth meant to entertain, but a possibility shaped by memory, absence, and repetition. A proposed first world, often called Mu, as we move through symbols, ruins, migration, catastrophe, and interpretation, this is not a search for certainty. It is an examination of how humans explain what cannot be fully recovered. Let the pace remain calm. Let the questions remain open. And let the past unfold without urgency. The idea of a first world. In the late 19th century, a French scholar named Auguste Le Plongeon claimed that the ancient Maya texts he studied described a vast civilization older than Egypt. He called it Mu. According to his interpretation, Mu was not a regional culture, but a parent society, a place from which knowledge spread outward across oceans. Le Plongeon believed this civilization existed thousands of years before the first Egyptian dynasties and vanished suddenly after a catastrophe. His work was dismissed by most academics, yet the name Mu persisted in alternative historical writing. The concept reappeared in the 1922 through James Churchward, a former British Army officer. Churchward claimed he had been shown stone tablets in India, written in an ancient language he said predated Sanskrit. These tablets, he argued, told the story of Mu as a vast continent in the Pacific Ocean. Churchward described Mu as a technologically advanced society that existed over 50,000 years ago. He wrote that its people were skilled engineers, astronomers, and builders who influenced cultures across the globe. Churchward stated that Mu was not discovered through excavation but through comparison. He pointed to similarities in symbols found in Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and the Americas. He argued that shared motifs, such as the serpent, the sun disk, and stepped pyramids, indicated a single source. In his books, Mu became the mother civilization from which all others descended. Mainstream archaeology rejected these claims, citing a lack of physical evidence and reliance on unverifiable texts. Despite rejection, the idea continued to circulate, especially during the early 20th century when lost continents were widely discussed. At the same time Mu was proposed, scientists debated Lemuria, a hypothetical landmass once thought to explain similarities between species in India and Madagascar. Although plate tectonics later removed the need for such theories, the cultural idea of a sunken continent remained influential. Mu occupied a similar space, positioned between geology, myth, and speculative history. In some retellings, Mu was not only ancient but guided by non-human intelligence. Writers in the mid-20th century suggested that Mu's advanced knowledge could not have developed naturally in such deep antiquity. They proposed that extraterrestrial beings introduced mathematics, astronomy, and architecture to early humans. These beings were described as teachers rather than conquerors. They arrived, instructed, and departed, leaving behind societies capable of monumental construction. Supporters of this view pointed to the sudden appearance of complex structures in the archaeological record. They cited the precision of megalithic sites, the alignment of pyramids with stars, and the use of massive stone blocks without clear evidence of transitional technologies. In this framework, Mu became the first human experiment guided by outside intelligence. Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Americas were later inheritors of fragmented knowledge. One recurring detail in Mu narratives is the emphasis on global dispersion. Churchward wrote that Mu established colonies across the world, including in Egypt, Central America, and Southeast Asia. After Mu's destruction, survivors carried their knowledge to these regions. Over generations, the original system degraded, becoming myth, ritual, and symbol rather than applied science. Temples replaced laboratories. Priests replaced engineers. Egypt plays a central role in these claims. The sudden emergence of pyramid building during the Third Dynasty is often cited. The Step Pyramid of Djoser, constructed around 2000, 630 BCE, appears without clear architectural predecessors. According to Mu theorists, this was not innovation but restoration. Egypt, they argue, rebuilt using principles inherited from a far older source. The pyramids were not inventions but echoes. Ancient Egyptian texts do not mention Mu directly, but some proponents refer to the concept of Zep Tepi, translated as the first time. Zep Tepi was described as a distant age, when gods ruled the land and order was established. In speculative interpretations, Zep Tepi is linked to Mu. The gods become remembered extraterrestrial teachers, and the first time becomes the era of global instruction. Geography plays a crucial role in evaluating these claims. Mu is usually placed in the Pacific Ocean, covering an area larger than modern Asia. Modern geology finds no evidence of a sunken continent of this size within human history. Ocean floor mapping shows no submerged landmass matching Churchward's descriptions. This remains one of the strongest objections to the Mu hypothesis. In response, alternative explanations emerged. Some writers proposed that Mu was not a single continent but a network of islands now submerged due to rising sea levels after the last ice age. Around 12,000 years ago, global sea levels rose by over 100 meters. Coastal settlements were flooded worldwide. In this view, Mu becomes symbolic rather than literal, representing a lost maritime culture rather than a vanished continent. Extraterrestrial involvement is often justified through perceived gaps in early human development. Supporters note that agriculture, writing, and monumental architecture appear within a relatively short span of time, after tens of thousands of years of apparent stability. They argue that such rapid change suggests intervention. Critics respond that this interpretation underestimates cumulative cultural evolution and overstates discontinuity. No physical artifact conclusively links Mu to extraterrestrial contact. There are no confirmed tools, inscriptions, or materials that demonstrate non-human origin. Claims rely instead on patterns, alignments, and shared symbols. These similarities can also be explained through independent development or cultural diffusion without invoking lost continents or visitors from space. Still, the endurance of Mu as an idea reflects a broader human tendency. When faced with deep time and incomplete records, imagination fills the gaps. Mu offers a single origin story that simplifies complexity. It presents history as inheritance rather than invention. Civilizations become recipients, not creators. Throughout the 20th century, Mu appeared in books, radio programs, and later online forums. It became associated with other lost civilizations, such as Atlantis. While Atlantis traces back to Plato, Mu remains a modern construction. Its authority comes not from ancient texts but from repetition and resonance. Today, Mu occupies a space outside academic history, but within popular consciousness. It allows pyramids, temples, and myths to be connected under one forgotten banner. Whether viewed as fiction, speculation, or symbolic memory, Mu continues to be discussed as the first world, standing quietly before recorded time. Early echoes across the Pacific. Across the scattered islands of the Pacific Ocean, early European explorers recorded traditions that appeared older than the islands themselves. Stories spoke of ancestral homelands beyond the horizon, places lost to the sea. In Polynesia, chants described long journeys from a vanished center. On Easter Island, known locally as Rapa Nui, oral histories referred to an earlier land called Hiva, a place of origin rather than destination. These accounts were later gathered by missionaries and anthropologists during the 19th century, preserved in fragmented form. Supporters of the Mu hypothesis interpret these traditions as cultural memory. They suggest that island societies retained echoes of a much older homeland submerged by rising seas. Churchward argued that these oral records were distorted recollections of Mu's collapse. According to his writings, the Pacific was once a connected region of high land and structured settlements, later broken apart by geological disaster. Survivors, he claimed, spread outward in canoes, carrying ritual knowledge rather than technical systems. Archaeological evidence from the Pacific shows early human settlement beginning around 1,500 BCE in regions such as Tonga and Samoa. These populations developed complex navigation techniques using stars, ocean swells and bird behavior. The precision of Polynesian navigation has drawn attention from researchers. Some have noted that such methods appear highly developed for societies without written charts. Alternative theorists argue this knowledge was inherited rather than discovered independently. Stone structures across the Pacific are often cited in these discussions. On the island of Pohnpei, the ruins of Nan Madol consist of massive basalt columns stacked into artificial islets. Construction is estimated to have occurred between 1200 and 1500 CE, though local legends claim much greater antiquity. Nan Madol is sometimes called the Venice of the Pacific due to its canals and engineered layout. The scale of stone transport remains debated, particularly given the absence of metal tools. Mu theorists interpret Nan Madol as a remnant of pre-flood engineering traditions. They suggest that the builders preserved fragments of an earlier architectural system passed down through ritualized instruction. Mainstream archaeology attributes the site to local political organization and labor mobilization, not lost global inheritance. Still, the isolation of the structure and its unusual materials continue to attract speculation. Moving westward, similarities are often drawn between Southeast Asian step pyramids and those in the Americas. Structures such as Gunung Padang in Indonesia have been proposed as older than previously thought. Some studies suggest portions of the site may date back to 10,000 BCE, though these claims remain contested. Gunung Padang consists of terraced stone layers atop a volcanic hill. Its purpose is unclear, and excavation is ongoing. For Mu advocates, Gunung Padang represents continuity. They argue that terraced construction reflects a shared design language spanning continents. In their view, these forms did not emerge separately but were adapted locally from a common source. Critics note that stepped forms are structurally practical and arise naturally when building with stone and earth. Similar shapes do not require shared origin. Across the Pacific coast of the Americas, monumental stonework appears in regions such as Peru and Mexico. Cultures like the Norte Xico civilization, active around 3000 BCE, built large platform mounds without ceramics or clear evidence of warfare. The speed at which social complexity developed in these areas is sometimes highlighted by alternative historians. They argue that rapid urban planning suggests inherited frameworks rather than gradual experimentation. Extraterrestrial interpretations often intersect here. Some writers claim that early Pacific cultures acted as custodians of knowledge, given long before. According to this view, Mu served as the first training ground, while later societies implemented diluted versions. The teachers, described as sky beings or luminous figures, appear in regional myths under different names. In Polynesia, they are remembered as Atua. In the Andes, they appear as Viracocha. These figures are interpreted not as gods but as instructors. Mainstream interpretations treat these beings as symbolic representations of natural forces or social authority. Anthropology emphasizes metaphor, ritual, and social cohesion rather than literal visitation. Yet the repetition of similar creator figures across distant cultures continues to be cited by those searching for deeper connections. Linguistic patterns are also used as supporting material. Churchwood claimed that certain root words appeared across unrelated languages, indicating a common ancestral tongue. Modern linguistics does not support this conclusion. Comparative studies show that similarities often result from coincidence, borrowing, or universal sound patterns. No recognized language family links Pacific, American, and African languages at the depth Mu would require. Geological evidence remains a central obstacle. The Pacific Plate shows no sign of recent continental submergence on the scale described in Mu narratives. While sea levels did rise significantly after the last ice age, the changes affected coastlines rather than entire continents. However, submerged coastal settlements are known to exist worldwide. These drowned landscapes remain largely unexplored. Some researchers have shifted focus from continents to networks. In this reframing, Mu is not a place but a system. It represents a prehistoric exchange network connecting maritime cultures long before recorded history. Under this model, similarities arise through sustained contact rather than centralized origin. Long-distance seafaring may have begun earlier than once assumed. Evidence for early transoceanic contact remains limited but not entirely absent. Sweet potato remains found in Polynesia date to before European contact, suggesting some form of interaction with South America. This discovery complicates strict isolation models. It does not confirm Mu, but it opens space for reconsidering early movement across the Pacific. Within extraterrestrial frameworks, this movement is guided rather than random. Proponents claim that navigation knowledge was introduced fully formed, not developed slowly. The lack of intermediate stages in surviving records is cited as support. Critics respond that preservation bias removes early evidence and exaggerates suddenness. As research continues, many Pacific sites remain only partially studied. Dense vegetation, political instability, and funding limitations restrict excavation. This absence of data allows speculation to persist. Mu occupies this uncertainty, filling the quiet spaces between confirmed dates and incomplete maps. Rather than presenting direct proof, Mu theories rely on accumulation. Patterns are layered until coincidence appears intentional. Whether these patterns reflect a lost mother civilization, independent innovation, or selective interpretation remains unresolved. What persists is the sense that the Pacific holds stories not yet fully told, shaped by water, memory, and distance. Egypt and the memory of Zep Tepi. Ancient Egyptian civilization presented itself as old, even in its earliest records. The first dynasties did not describe a beginning in the human sense, but a continuation. Kings listed their reigns as part of a longer sequence that extended backward into a distant age called Zep Tepi, translated as the first time. This period was not placed within ordinary chronology. It existed before measured years, before dynasties, and before written memory became fixed. Egyptian priestly texts describe Zep Tepi as an era when the land was ordered after chaos. The Nile followed its course. The sky was separated from the earth. Sacred laws were established. These acts were attributed not to human kings, but to beings referred to as gods. They ruled directly, walked among people, and later withdrew. After their departure, human rulers inherited a world already structured. The Palermo stone, one of the earliest royal annals, lists rulers who reigned before the first dynasty. Their reigns are measured in thousands of years rather than decades. Names such as Horus, Thoth, and Ptah appear not as symbolic concepts, but as kings of an earlier order. Egyptologists generally interpret these entries as mythological, symbolic, or ritualized memory, rather than literal history. In speculative interpretations, these pre-dynastic rulers are viewed differently. They are presented as non-human instructors, whose long reigns reflect longevity beyond human limits. Within Mu-based frameworks, these figures are linked to survivors or representatives of a much older global civilization. Egypt, in this view, did not invent its cosmology but preserved fragments of inherited knowledge. Architectural evidence is often cited alongside these texts. The sudden emergence of monumental stone construction during the early dynastic period remains a subject of debate. Prior to the Third Dynasty, Egyptian architecture relied heavily on mud brick. Then, within a short span of time, stone was adopted on a massive scale. The step pyramid complex at Saqqara introduced not only stone blocks, but complex planning, symmetry, and ceremonial alignment. Imhotep, the architect credited with the step pyramid, is often described as a genius without precedent. His knowledge appears complete rather than experimental. Mu theorists argue that Imhotep was restoring principles rather than inventing them. The precision, in their view, reflects access to older templates preserved through priestly tradition. Egyptian temples reinforce this idea of inheritance. Inscriptions frequently state that a structure was built according to the original plan, or as it was in the first time. Temples were not described as new creations, but renewals. Each rebuilding was framed as a return to an earlier, purer state. This language suggests continuity rather than innovation. The orientation of Egyptian monuments is also central to speculative claims. The Great Pyramid aligns closely with true north, with an accuracy difficult to replicate even with modern instruments. Its internal passages reflect specific stellar alignments, particularly with circumpolar stars associated with immortality. These stars were believed never to set, symbolizing eternal order. In alternative frameworks, this astronomical precision implies advanced observational knowledge. Some propose that such alignments reflect a time when the sky was mapped more completely, possibly with external guidance. Mainstream Egyptology attributes this precision to careful observation, ritual importance, and cumulative expertise developed over generations. Mythological parallels extend beyond architecture. Egyptian creation stories describe a primeval mound rising from chaotic waters. From this mound, life and order emerged. Similar flood and emergence myths appear in Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, and the Pacific. Mu theorists interpret these shared motifs as memories of rising seas after a global catastrophe. Within this narrative, Mu's destruction is associated with flooding, earthquakes, and fire. Survivors are said to have reached Egypt long before dynastic history, integrating their knowledge into local traditions. Over time, the original context faded, leaving symbolic language where technical meaning once existed. Extraterrestrial interpretations reinterpret Egyptian gods through this lens. Thoth becomes a teacher of mathematics and writing rather than a deity. Ptah becomes an engineer who spoke the world into form through vibration. Ra becomes not the sun itself, but a representation of celestial knowledge. These readings shift myth into misunderstood instruction. No Egyptian text explicitly describes beings arriving from the sky in mechanical craft. References to the sky are symbolic, religious, and poetic. However, proponents argue that metaphor replaced description as direct knowledge was lost. Over centuries, instruction became ritual. Memory became myth. The Turin King List, another ancient document, reinforces the notion of deep antiquity. Like the Palermo stone, it lists rulers before the dynasties, though much of it is damaged. These reigns stretch far beyond human lifespans. Egyptologists interpret these as symbolic timekeeping devices. Alternative interpretations treat them as literal records, misunderstood by later scribes. Geological context is often introduced at this stage. Around the end of the last ice age, North Africa experienced significant climate shifts. Regions that are now desert were once green, with lakes and rivers. Human settlement patterns changed dramatically. In speculative narratives, this environmental transition coincides with the end of Zep Tepi and the withdrawal of advanced instructors. Mainstream archaeology places the rise of Egyptian civilization firmly within this environmental shift. Agriculture expanded along the Nile as surrounding regions dried. Population concentrated. Social complexity increased. There is no accepted evidence of an earlier global civilization influencing this process. Still, Egypt's own framing of its past remains unusual. Unlike cultures that celebrate innovation, Egypt emphasized preservation. Change was often resisted. The highest ideal was Ma'at, a state of balance established at the beginning. Kings were judged not by progress, but by how closely they maintained original order. This fixation on an original age supports speculative interpretations. If Egypt believed perfection lay in the past, then perhaps that past held something tangible. Mu theorists suggest that Egypt remembered a time when knowledge was complete and only needed to be maintained. Archaeology continues to uncover earlier Egyptian sites predating dynastic history. Pre-dynastic cemeteries, ceremonial centers, and early settlements show gradual development rather than sudden leaps. These findings challenge the idea of direct inheritance from a lost mother civilization. Yet they do not fully explain the symbolic weight Egypt placed on its earliest time. Zep Tepi remains a concept rather than a date. It exists outside conventional timelines. Whether it reflects myth, memory, or misinterpreted history remains unresolved. Within Mu narratives, it is treated as the Egyptian name for a global beginning. Within academic history, it is understood as cosmology rather than chronology. The tension between these views persists because Egypt left records that resist simple classification. Its gods rule as kings. Its kings become gods. Its past extends beyond measurement. In this ambiguity, speculative frameworks find space to operate. As the Nile flowed and dynasties rose, Egypt looked backward rather than forward. Its monuments pointed to the sky, its rituals reenacted origins, and its texts repeated the same foundational acts. Whether this reflects inheritance from Mu, symbolic theology, or cultural conservatism remains an open question, shaped as much by interpretation as evidence. Shared symbols and the language of origins. Across distant cultures separated by oceans and millennia, certain symbols appear with persistent regularity. They emerge on stone, clay, wood, and woven fiber. These forms repeat not as exact copies, but as recognizable patterns: circles divided by lines, serpents arranged in coils, stepped mountains rising toward the sky. For some researchers, these similarities are coincidence shaped by human perception. For others, they suggest a deeper connection rooted in a shared origin. One of the most frequently cited symbols is the serpent. In Egypt, the serpent appears as both protector and threat. The uraeus, worn on the pharaoh's crown, symbolized authority and divine legitimacy. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent represented knowledge, wind, and renewal. In Southeast Asia, naga figures guarded temples and water sources. Across the Pacific, serpent-like forms appear in tattoo patterns and oral traditions. These figures often bridge earth and sky, water and land. Supporters of the Mu hypothesis argue that the serpent symbol represents preserved technical knowledge. They suggest it encodes understanding of energy flow, cycles, or astronomical motion. In this reading, the serpent is not an animal, but a diagram. Over time, its meaning shifts from instruction to myth. Anthropology offers a different explanation. Serpents are common in human environments and evoke fear and respect. Their movements suggest power and transformation. Similar symbols can emerge independently without shared origin. Another recurring motif is the stepped pyramid or terraced mound. Structures with ascending levels appear in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Central America, South America, and parts of Asia. These forms are often aligned to cardinal directions or celestial events. Mu theorists argue that the repetition of this shape indicates a single architectural language spread globally. The pyramid, in this view, is not merely a tomb or platform, but a functional form tied to cosmology or energy. Mainstream archaeology emphasizes practicality. Step structures are stable when built from stone or earth. They allow for expansion, ritual access, and visibility. Independent cultures facing similar material constraints may arrive at similar solutions. Yet, alignment patterns complicate this explanation. Many of these structures show attention to solstices, equinoxes, or specific stars. This shared astronomical focus fuels speculation about a common knowledge base. The sun disk is another widespread symbol. In Egypt, it appears as Aten, Ra, and other solar forms. In the Andes, the sun was central to state religion. In Japan, the imperial lineage traces back to a sun goddess. Across Oceania, solar motifs appear in carvings and ceremonial objects. Mu narratives interpret this as reverence for a celestial source of instruction. The sun becomes both literal and symbolic, representing order, timekeeping, and authority. Alternative interpretations link solar worship to agriculture. The sun governs seasons and harvests. Societies dependent on crops naturally elevate solar cycles. Similar dependence yields similar symbolism. This explanation accounts for function, but does not address the structural consistency of certain motifs across unrelated regions. Geometric patterns also appear repeatedly. Spirals, concentric circles, and intersecting lines are found in petroglyphs worldwide. Some spirals align with solar movement or seasonal change. Others appear near water sources or burial sites. Mu theorists suggest these patterns encode navigational or astronomical data. Critics argue that simple geometry emerges naturally from human mark-making and aesthetic preference. Writing systems are often introduced into this discussion. Early scripts appear abruptly in several regions. Egyptian hieroglyphs, Sumerian cuneiform, and Indus symbols all emerge within a few thousand years. They differ in form, but share the function of recording information. Some alternative historians propose that writing was introduced rather than invented, adapted locally from a prior system. Linguistic evidence does not support a single protoscript connecting these systems. Each writing tradition shows internal development and regional specificity. However, the idea of shared inspiration persists, particularly in speculative frameworks that view symbols as degraded remnants of earlier instruction. Mythological narratives often parallel symbolic forms, Flood stories appear across continents. A world destroyed by water, followed by renewal, is described in Mesopotamian texts, Hebrew scripture, Mesoamerican codices, and Pacific oral traditions. Mu theorists interpret these as memory of a real global catastrophe. Sea level rise at the end of the last ice age provides a possible natural basis. Flooding would have affected coastal societies worldwide. Anthropology treats flood myths as responses to local disasters generalized over time. Rivers flood regularly. Coastal storms erase settlements. Memory compresses events into archetypal stories. Shared experience produces shared narrative without requiring shared origin. Another common theme is the civilizing teacher. Cultures describe figures who arrive from elsewhere, teach laws, agriculture, or building, then depart. These figures are often bearded, luminous, or associated with the sky. In Mu narratives, they represent surviving instructors or extraterrestrial guides. In academic interpretation, they symbolize the introduction of social order or the authority of priesthood. Symbol repetition gains strength through accumulation. One symbol alone proves little. Multiple symbols across many cultures create an impression of connection. Critics caution against selection bias. Humans notice similarities more readily than differences. Thousands of unique symbols exist but receive less attention. Material context matters. Symbols change meaning depending on use. A serpent on a crown differs from a serpent carved near a spring. A pyramid used as a tomb differs from one used as a platform. Interpreting all symbols as remnants of a single source risks flattening cultural diversity. Still, the persistence of certain forms raises questions about human cognition. Some shapes may resonate universally due to perception, environment, or biology. Spirals mirror shells and storms. Pyramids mirror mountains. Serpents mirror rivers. These natural correspondences may explain symbolic convergence. Mu-based interpretations extend beyond symbolism into intent. They propose that symbols were deliberately designed to preserve knowledge across collapse. Simplified forms could survive oral transmission. Over time, function would be forgotten while form remained. This idea frames symbols as storage devices rather than decoration. No method exists to test this hypothesis directly. Symbols do not carry timestamps or authorship. Interpretation depends on context, comparison, and assumption. Without corroborating material evidence, conclusions remain speculative. Archaeology continues to document regional development. New discoveries often complicate simple narratives. Early sites reveal experimentation, adaptation, and local innovation. These findings support independent cultural evolution while leaving open the possibility of limited contact. The debate over shared symbols reflects a broader tension between unity and diversity in human history. One view seeks a single origin, a mother civilization from which all others descend. Another emphasizes multiple beginnings shaped by environment and interaction. Symbols sit at the intersection of these views, ambiguous and enduring. As long as symbols remain open to interpretation, they will support multiple narratives. For some, they whisper of a forgotten world beneath the sea. For others, they reflect the shared constraints and creativity of the human mind. In either case, they persist as marks left by people attempting to understand their place in time. Cataclysm and the end of the First World. Accounts of Mu almost always end the same way. The civilization does not decline slowly. It does not fragment through war or famine. It ends abruptly. Earth shakes. Fire appears. Water rises. Land disappears. This ending is presented not as legend, but as consequence. In these narratives, Mu collapses through natural forces large enough to erase memory itself. James Churchward described Mu's destruction as sudden and total. He wrote that the land sank beneath the ocean after a sequence of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. According to his interpretation of ancient tablets, the catastrophe unfolded rapidly, leaving little time for escape. Only scattered survivors reached distant shores. Their descendants remembered fragments without context. The center was gone. Modern geology does not support the sudden sinking of a continent in the Pacific during human history. Continental crust does not behave this way. Land masses move slowly through plate tectonics. They do not collapse overnight. This contradiction led later writers to modify the scenario rather than abandon it. One revised model shifts focus from continents to coastlines. At the end of the last ice age, beginning around 12,000 years ago, global temperatures rose. Ice sheets melted. Sea levels increased by more than 100 meters. Low-lying coastal regions were submerged worldwide. Entire landscapes vanished beneath expanding oceans. Human populations living near shorelines were forced inland or displaced entirely. Archaeological evidence confirms that many early settlements now lie underwater. Submerged sites have been identified off the coasts of India, Europe, and Southeast Asia. These locations show signs of habitation predating known inland sites. Their discovery suggests that early human activity was concentrated along coastlines now lost to the sea. Within Mu frameworks, this flooding explains both disappearance and fragmentation. A maritime civilization dependent on coastal infrastructure would suffer disproportionate loss. Knowledge systems tied to navigation, trade, and centralized planning would collapse when ports vanished. Survivors would adapt to inland environments with limited resources. Complexity would be reduced. Another proposed mechanism is volcanic activity. The Pacific Ring of Fire contains some of the most active tectonic zones on Earth. Large eruptions occurred during the late Pleistocene and early Holocene. Volcanic ash layers found across wide regions indicate eruptions capable of disrupting climate and settlement. Combined with seismic instability, these events could have rendered large areas uninhabitable. Some alternative researchers connect Mu's end to cometary impact theories. Around 12,800 years ago, a period known as the Younger Dryas began abruptly. Temperatures dropped rapidly in parts of the northern hemisphere. Some scientists have proposed that an extraterrestrial impact triggered this event, though the theory remains controversial. If such an impact occurred, it could have caused widespread fires, flooding, and atmospheric disruption. In speculative narratives, this event marks the end of the First World. A technologically or socially advanced culture would be vulnerable to sudden environmental collapse. Infrastructure would fail, population would decline. Survivors would prioritize immediate survival over preservation of knowledge. Over generations, memory would degrade into myth. Flood myths are often cited in support of this scenario. Stories of a great deluge appear across continents. In Mesopotamia, a flood destroys earlier humanity. In Mesoamerica, previous worlds end through water. In the Pacific, islands sink and ancestral lands are lost. These stories differ in detail but share structure. A stable world ends, a new one begins. Anthropology explains flood myths through recurring natural disasters. Rivers overflow, storms destroy settlements. Oral traditions compress repeated events into singular narratives. The recurrence of flood stories does not require a single global cause. However, the timing of sea level rise aligns broadly with the end of the last ice age, providing a shared backdrop. Mu narratives emphasize scale. The catastrophe is not local, it is planetary. This scale is necessary to explain the absence of direct evidence. If destruction were complete, little would remain to excavate. Underwater archaeology becomes central to the argument. Vast areas of the continental shelf remain unexplored. Sediment accumulation obscures older layers. Absence of evidence is reframed as expected outcome. Critics argue that this reasoning is circular. Evidence is missing because it was destroyed. Destruction is inferred because evidence is missing. This logic prevents falsification. Without testable predictions, the hypothesis remains speculative. Extraterrestrial interpretations introduce an additional layer. Some writers suggest that Mu was deliberately abandoned. The instructors withdrew after the catastrophe, or before it occurred. Humanity was left to rebuild independently. Knowledge loss was not accidental but permitted. In this view, collapse was part of a larger experiment. No material evidence supports intentional abandonment by non-human agents. The idea persists because it resolves unanswered questions. It explains why advanced knowledge appears incomplete. It explains why monuments remain but methods do not. It assigns purpose to loss. Environmental archaeology provides alternative explanations. Knowledge systems require stable conditions. Climate disruption interrupts transmission. Writing systems may disappear. Skills dependent on specialization decline when population density drops. Complexity is fragile. It does not require external removal to vanish. In regions once proposed as Mu's core, such as Micronesia and Melanesia, archaeological records show gradual development rather than sudden collapse. Cultural continuity exists across millennia. This continuity challenges the idea of total erasure. However, continuity does not rule out earlier loss. It only sets limits on scale. Underwater exploration continues to expand. New sonar mapping reveals submerged river systems, terraces, and possible habitation zones. These discoveries reshape understanding of early human geography. They do not confirm Mu, but they demonstrate that large portions of human history lie beneath the sea. Cataclysm theories persist because they align with human experience of vulnerability. Civilizations fall. Environments change. Memory fails. Large-scale loss feels plausible even when specifics remain uncertain. Mu becomes a symbol of this fragility. Whether or not a single mother civilization existed, the end of the Ice Age marked a turning point. Coastlines shifted. Migration increased. New societies formed. Older ways of life ended. In this transition, stories of a prior world may have emerged naturally. Mu's destruction functions as an explanatory boundary. Beyond it lies speculation. After it begins recorded history. The catastrophe separates what can be known from what can only be imagined. It justifies absence while inviting interpretation. In the quiet space between geology and myth, Mu's end remains unresolved. It is shaped by water levels, fault lines, and human memory. Whether it reflects an actual lost system or a narrative response to deep environmental change, it continues to frame discussions about origins and loss, survivors, migration, and fragmented knowledge. When environments change faster than societies can adapt, survival becomes the primary concern. Systems that once depended on stability are reduced to what can be carried, remembered, or repeated. In Mu-based narratives, this moment follows cataclysm. The center disappears. What remains is movement. People travel away from drowned coastlines, volcanic zones, and unstable land. They move along rivers, across seas, and into unfamiliar terrain. Migration after environmental collapse is well documented in archaeology. At the end of the last ice age, human populations shifted repeatedly in response to changing climates. Grasslands replaced forests. Deserts expanded. Shorelines moved inland. These transitions forced communities to relocate, often abandoning long-established sites. Material culture changed as people adapted to new conditions. Within speculative frameworks, Mu's survivors are placed into this pattern. They are described not as refugees in the modern sense, but as carriers of memory. They retain fragments of older systems. These fragments are incomplete. Technical processes are reduced to ritual. Measurement becomes symbol. Instruction becomes story. Navigation is often emphasized. Maritime survival requires retained knowledge of stars, currents, and weather. Polynesian navigation methods demonstrate this kind of transmission. Techniques were passed orally, preserved through chant and practice. Even without writing, complex information endured across generations. This model is used to argue that other forms of knowledge could survive in symbolic form. As survivors settled in new regions, they encountered existing populations or empty landscapes. Interaction altered both groups. Original knowledge adapted to local materials and needs. Over time, distinctions between inherited and locally developed practices blurred. What remained recognizable were patterns rather than explanations. In Egypt, priestly lineages controlled access to sacred knowledge. Temples functioned as repositories of memory. In speculative interpretations, this priesthood preserved inherited principles under layers of theology. Geometry became sacred proportion. Astronomy became myth. Only selected individuals were trained to maintain these systems. In Mesopotamia, early city-states developed writing to manage agriculture and trade. Cuneiform emerges around 3200 BCE. Alternative theorists note the absence of gradual experimentation in the surviving record. Writing appears functional from the outset. They interpret this as adaptation of an older conceptual framework, rather than invention from nothing. Mainstream scholarship explains this through preservation bias. Earlier stages likely existed on perishable materials. Clay tablets survived where wood and fiber did not. Absence of evidence does not imply sudden appearance. Still, the perception of abrupt emergence fuels speculation. In the Americas, monumental architecture appears in multiple regions without direct contact. Norte Chico, active around 3000 BCE, developed urban centers without pottery or known writing. Structures were large and planned. Some alternative historians argue that social organization of this scale suggests inherited models. Archaeology attributes it to localized development supported by maritime resources. Fragmentation affects not only technology but social structure. Hierarchies simplify. Specialized roles disappear. Knowledge, once distributed among many, becomes concentrated in few. Over time, this concentration leads to authority. Those who remember become leaders. Myth reinforces status. Origin stories legitimize control. This process can be observed historically. After the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, technical knowledge declined in some regions. Roads deteriorated. Literacy decreased. Yet fragments survived in monasteries, guilds, and oral tradition. Knowledge was not erased, but reshaped by context. Mu narratives apply this logic at a much deeper timescale. Language also fragments during migration. Dialects diverge. Meanings shift. Words persist while definitions change. In speculative interpretations, this explains why symbolic terms appear across cultures without shared grammar. The sound remains. The function is lost. Ritual becomes a storage mechanism. Actions repeated precisely preserve form even when meaning fades. Dance, chant, and ceremony encode sequence. Over generations, ritual may continue long after its original purpose is forgotten. In this way, knowledge survives without comprehension. This concept appears in discussions of megalithic construction. Some sites show evidence of precise placement without clear understanding of underlying principles. Builders follow tradition rather than theory. The result is functional but unexplained. Mu theorists argue that this reflects degraded inheritance. Archaeology offers alternative explanations. Tradition itself can produce precision. Cultural continuity allows skills to be refined without formal theory. Apprenticeship transfers technique through observation and repetition. Understanding does not require abstraction. Extraterrestrial interpretations introduce intent. In these narratives, knowledge was designed to survive fragmentation. Symbols were chosen for durability. Myths were crafted to endure oral transmission. Instruction was encoded to outlast collapse. Humanity was expected to forget details but retain structure. No evidence confirms deliberate encoding by non-human agents. However, humans themselves encode knowledge symbolically. Calendars mark time through ritual. Stories preserve lore. Memory techniques rely on imagery. Symbolic transmission is a human strategy. Migration patterns following environmental change support partial loss. Coastal populations displaced inland lose access to maritime resources. Diets change. Social organization shifts. Skills become obsolete. New environments favor new adaptations. Older systems may be remembered but unused. Over centuries, memory reshapes itself to fit current reality. Stories are simplified. Contradictions are resolved through myth. The past becomes idealized. A lost golden age emerges in narrative. Mu occupies this space as a conceptual ancestor. Fragmentation explains diversity. If knowledge spread outward from a common source, local conditions would shape outcomes. This produces variation rather than uniformity. Shared motifs appear alongside distinct practices. Unity exists only at abstract level. Critics note that fragmentation can be invoked to explain any inconsistency. If evidence is absent, it was lost. If evidence differs, it fragmented. This flexibility limits the explanatory power of the hypothesis. Without constraints, interpretation becomes unfalsifiable. Archaeological records increasingly show independent innovation. Agriculture arose separately in multiple regions. Writing systems differ fundamentally. Metallurgy followed distinct trajectories. These findings support parallel development rather than inheritance from a single source. Yet parallel development does not exclude contact. Limited exchange can influence without determining. Ideas travel unevenly. Adoption depends on context. Early human societies were more mobile than once assumed. Migration networks existed long before recorded history. Underwater archaeology continues to uncover drowned landscapes. These sites may clarify early migration routes. They may reveal continuity or disruption. For now, they remain largely inaccessible. Survivors, whether of Mu or of environmental change more broadly, shaped the world that followed. They carried what they could. They adapted what they remembered. Knowledge did not vanish. It transformed. In this transformation, certainty was lost. Precision became approximation. Explanation became story. The past receded into symbol. What remained was enough to build again, but not enough to remember why things were once different. Mu narratives frame this process as inheritance from a vanished first world. Academic history frames it as adaptation across deep time. Both acknowledge movement, loss, and continuity. The difference lies in origin. As populations settled and new civilizations formed, fragments embedded themselves into local traditions. Over time, these fragments became indistinguishable from invention. The line between memory and creation dissolved. What followed was not restoration, but reinterpretation. Each society rebuilt according to its environment, needs, and beliefs. The first world, if it existed, survived only as pattern. Extraterrestrial architects and the question of intervention. The idea that non-human intelligence influenced early human development did not emerge from ancient texts alone. It formed gradually in the modern era, shaped by technological change, astronomy, and dissatisfaction with conventional timelines. As humans learned more about the universe, speculation turned outward. If life could exist elsewhere, then contact in the distant past became imaginable. In the early 20th century, theories about Mu focused on lost continents and forgotten cultures. Extraterrestrial explanations appeared later, particularly after the Second World War. Advances in rocketry, radio communication, and space exploration altered how people thought about distance and possibility. Writers began to reinterpret ancient gods as visitors. Descriptions of beings descending from the heavens were read literally rather than symbolically. Flying chariots, shining discs, and luminous figures were reframed as misunderstood technology. In this context, Mu evolved from a human mother civilization into a hybrid creation, shaped or guided by external intelligence. Supporters of this view argue that early humans lacked the time and infrastructure to develop advanced knowledge independently. They point to mathematics, astronomy, and large-scale construction as systems that appear complete rather than incremental. The absence of extensive trial and error evidence is presented as a gap requiring explanation. Extraterrestrial intervention fills this gap by introducing a catalyst. Knowledge is delivered rather than discovered. Humans become recipients. Learning accelerates. Once the instructors leave, progress slows. What remains are monuments without manuals and stories without context. This framework relies heavily on reinterpretation of ancient texts. In Sumerian records, gods descend from the sky and establish kingship. In Egyptian mythology, gods rule directly before humans inherit the throne. In Mesoamerican accounts, civilizing figures arrive, teach, and depart. These narratives are treated as distorted memory rather than metaphor. Academic interpretation differs sharply. Myths are understood as social constructs that explain order, authority, and environment. Gods embody natural forces, moral principles, or political legitimacy. Sky imagery reflects cosmology rather than spacecraft. There is no requirement for literal visitation. Physical evidence is central to the debate. No verified artifact demonstrates extraterrestrial technology in ancient contexts. Stone, copper, gold, and wood dominate the archaeological record. Construction methods, while impressive, are consistent with human labor and organization. Tools evolve over time. Techniques show adaptation. Proponents respond by emphasizing knowledge rather than material. They argue that instruction does not require permanent artifacts. Teaching can be oral. Guidance can be temporary. Advanced visitors would avoid leaving traceable technology. Their influence would appear only in outcomes. This reasoning shifts the discussion from evidence to plausibility. If visitors were careful, no proof would remain. This position cannot be tested directly. It rests on assumption rather than falsification. Astronomy is often highlighted. Ancient structures align with stars, solstices, and planetary cycles. Knowledge of precession, eclipses, and long-term celestial patterns appears in some traditions. Extraterrestrial interpretations suggest this knowledge exceeds naked-eye observation. Astronomers counter that long-term observation by patient cultures can yield accurate results. Repetition across generations refines understanding. No advanced instruments are required, alignment accuracy varies, and many claims rely on selective measurement. The concept of ancient astronauts also intersects with human psychology. Complex achievements provoke discomfort when their process is not immediately visible. Attribution to external intelligence resolves this discomfort. It replaces uncertainty with explanation. Mu narratives incorporate this dynamic. The mother civilization becomes a training ground. Extraterrestrial architects introduce foundational principles. Humans apply them unevenly. Collapse erases context. Later civilizations rediscover fragments and attribute them to gods. Some versions of the theory portray the visitors as benevolent. Others describe experimentation or oversight. Humanity is framed as developing under observation. When conditions change, supervision ends. This framing mirrors modern experiences with technology and authority. Critics note that these narratives reflect contemporary concerns projected backward. As humans engage with artificial intelligence and space exploration, they reinterpret the past through similar lenses. Ancient myths become mirrors rather than records. Scientific inquiry into extraterrestrial life continues independently of ancient history. Astrobiology studies extremophiles, exoplanets, and chemical precursors to life. No evidence currently supports past contact with Earth. The search focuses on probability, not precedent. Still, the absence of evidence does not prevent speculation. Human history contains gaps. Deep time obscures detail. Where records end, imagination begins. Mu functions as a placeholder for these unknowns. Extraterrestrial explanations persist because they offer coherence. They unify disparate cultures under a single narrative. They explain sudden emergence and sudden loss. They provide agency where randomness feels unsatisfying. Archaeology emphasizes local context. Development follows environment, resource availability, and social structure. Similar solutions arise independently. Knowledge accumulates unevenly. Collapse follows disruption. No external guidance is required. Yet archaeology also acknowledges uncertainty. Many sites remain unexplored. Preservation is incomplete. Interpretation evolves. What is dismissed today may be reconsidered tomorrow, though extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The question of intervention ultimately reflects how history is framed. One approach views humanity as autonomous, creative, and adaptive. The other sees humanity as guided, influenced, or assisted. Both acknowledge human capacity. They differ in attribution. Mu narratives adopt the second approach. The first world is not purely human. Its sophistication requires explanation beyond gradualism. Extraterrestrial architects provide that explanation, even if unverifiable. As research advances, some questions narrow while others remain open. Sea levels, migration routes, and early settlement patterns are increasingly understood. Monument construction methods are reconstructed. Human capability becomes clearer. What remains unresolved is perception. How ancient people understood their own origins. Whether gods were metaphors, memories, or misinterpretations cannot be definitively answered. Texts reflect belief, not intent. Extraterrestrial theories persist at the edge of this uncertainty. They are not supported by evidence, but neither are they easily dismissed by those seeking unified origin stories. They exist alongside archaeology, not within it. Mu, in this context, becomes a vessel. It carries lost continents, drowned coastlines, migrating survivors, and celestial teachers. It adapts to each new question. Its form changes, but its function remains. The question of intervention may never be resolved conclusively. It depends on future discovery or reinterpretation. Until then, it remains a speculative lens through which early history is viewed. What follows is not proof, but pattern recognition shaped by modern expectation. Whether those patterns reflect external guidance or internal human convergence remains uncertain. Archaeology, evidence, and the limits of proof. Archaeology operates within constraint. It works with what survives, not with what once existed in full. Organic materials decay, coastlines disappear, settlements are buried, eroded, or reused. What remains is partial. Interpretation fills the spaces between fragments. This limitation shapes every discussion about deep history, including claims surrounding Mu. Modern archaeology relies on stratigraphy, dating methods, material analysis, and contextual comparison. Artifacts are evaluated based on location, association, and composition. Claims must be grounded in verifiable context. For Mu, this requirement presents a problem. No site has been excavated that can be identified as a central origin consistent with descriptions of a vast Pacific civilization. Proponents often respond by pointing to the ocean. Much of the continental shelf was dry land during the last ice age. These areas are now submerged, inaccessible, or buried under sediment. Underwater archaeology is expensive and slow. Large regions remain unmapped. This gap is presented as an explanation for absence. Underwater discoveries do exist. Off the coast of India, structures near Dwarka have been interpreted by some as ancient urban remains. In the Mediterranean, submerged Neolithic settlements have been documented. These findings confirm that early human sites can be lost to rising seas. They do not, however, demonstrate the existence of a single advanced mother civilization. Dating methods provide another boundary. Radiocarbon dating, thermoluminescence, and optically stimulated luminescence allow estimation of age, but each has limits. Accuracy decreases with time. Contamination alters results. Interpretation depends on sample context. Claims that place Mu tens of thousands of years ago push these methods toward their margins. Sites sometimes cited as evidence for extreme antiquity, such as Gunung Padang, remain contested. Differing interpretations of subsurface layers lead to conflicting conclusions. Archaeology requires consensus built through replication and peer review. Until findings are independently confirmed, they remain provisional. Another challenge lies in defining advancement. Mu is often described as technologically superior, yet descriptions vary. Some accounts emphasize stone architecture and astronomy rather than metallurgy or machinery. This ambiguity allows flexibility but weakens testability. Without clear criteria, evidence cannot be evaluated consistently. Archaeologists assess societies through material culture. Tools, dwellings, waste, and burial practices reveal daily life. No assemblage has been found that suggests a level of organization beyond what is already attributed to known ancient cultures. Megalithic construction, while impressive, falls within documented human capability given time and labor. Patterns are central to Mu arguments. Similarities across cultures are interpreted as inheritance. Archaeology approaches similarity cautiously. Convergent development is common. Different societies facing similar problems often arrive at similar solutions. Agriculture, pottery, and monument building emerged independently in multiple regions. Trade complicates interpretation. Ideas and materials move without requiring centralized origin. Obsidian, shells, and motifs travel through exchange networks. Contact spreads, influence unevenly. Archaeology documents this through sourcing and distribution studies. Selective emphasis is another issue. Mu narratives highlight certain sites while ignoring others that do not fit the pattern. Thousands of small settlements show gradual development. These rarely appear in alternative histories because they undermine sudden origin models. Written records pose additional limits. Writing systems appear relatively late. Before that, history relies on material remains and oral tradition. Oral transmission changes over time. Memory compresses and reshapes events. Archaeology cannot access original narratives, only later representations. Extraterrestrial claims face even stricter evidentiary standards. No artifact demonstrates non-human manufacture. No material shows composition beyond Earth origin. No verified inscription describes contact in unambiguous terms. Without such evidence, these claims remain outside scientific archaeology. Science operates on falsifiability. A claim must be testable, and capable of being disproven. Mu theories often lack this feature. When evidence is absent, it is attributed to destruction. When evidence contradicts the model, it is reinterpreted as fragmentary. This adaptability prevents resolution. Archaeology accepts uncertainty but limits speculation. Hypotheses must narrow as data increases. Over time, explanations become more precise. Broad narratives give way to localized understanding. Mu resists this narrowing. It remains expansive by necessity. This does not mean archaeology dismisses unknowns. Entire periods remain poorly understood. The transition from foraging to farming varies regionally. Early seafaring timelines continue to shift. New discoveries revise models regularly. Openness exists within methodological boundaries. The appeal of Mu lies partly in dissatisfaction with these boundaries. Scientific caution feels slow. Speculative narratives move quickly. They connect distant points and offer coherence. Archaeology fragments rather than unifies. Yet fragmentation reflects reality. Human history is not a single line. It is overlapping, regional, and adaptive. Knowledge is gained and lost repeatedly. Limits of proof do not imply proof of absence. They define what can be responsibly claimed. Archaeology does not claim to know everything. It claims to know only what evidence supports. Mu occupies the space beyond that support. It exists where data thins and imagination expands. It draws strength from gaps that may never close entirely. Future technology may alter this balance. Improved underwater exploration could reveal new sites. Dating methods may extend deeper. Genetic studies may clarify migration. Each advance will refine understanding. If evidence emerges that supports a unified prehistoric system, archaeology will adapt. Until then, Mu remains unverified. It is a hypothesis without anchor. The limits of proof shape not only what is known, but how narratives form. In the absence of certainty, stories persist. Mu continues because it answers questions archaeology leaves open. It provides a single beginning. It explains loss. It assigns meaning to similarity. Whether those answers reflect reality remains unproven. Archaeology remains grounded. It measures, compares, and revises. It does not resolve every mystery. It narrows possibility. Within those narrowed spaces, Mu still stands. Not as evidence, but as idea. Why the myth of Mu endures. The idea of Mu persists, not because it is proven, but because it is useful. It offers a way to think about origins without accepting fragmentation. It gathers scattered beginnings into a single source. In doing so, it reduces uncertainty. For many, this reduction feels more satisfying than ambiguity. Human history is incomplete by nature. Written records cover only a small fraction of time. Archaeology fills gaps slowly and unevenly. Between known dates stretch long periods with limited information. These gaps invite interpretation. Mu occupies those intervals, not as evidence, but as explanation. Psychologically, humans seek coherence. Disconnected developments feel unsatisfying. Independent invention across continents challenges intuition. A single mother civilization feels simpler. It aligns with narratives of inheritance rather than coincidence. Complexity is easier to manage when traced back to one origin. Mu also resolves discomfort around loss. Civilizations rise and fall. Knowledge disappears. Skills vanish. Without a framework, these losses appear random. Mu reframes them as aftermath. Collapse becomes meaningful. What is missing was once present. Absence gains context. The myth also reflects modern experience. In a world shaped by rapid technological change, people are aware of how quickly systems can fail. Infrastructure collapses disrupt daily life. Digital knowledge disappears without backups. Mu mirrors this awareness, projecting modern vulnerability into deep time. Cultural memory plays a role. Many societies preserve stories of golden ages. These ages precede decline. They are remembered as times of harmony, order, or abundance. Mu functions as a universal golden age, shared across cultures rather than confined to one tradition. Literature and media reinforce this pattern. Lost worlds are recurring themes. Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu appear in novels, documentaries, and online discussions. Repetition grants familiarity. Familiarity creates credibility. Over time, distinction between fiction and hypothesis blurs. The early 20th century shaped Mu's modern form. During this period, archaeology was young. Many ancient sites were newly discovered. Chronologies were uncertain. Lost continents were still debated in science. Mu emerged in an environment receptive to grand synthesis. As scientific understanding advanced, some theories were discarded. Plate tectonics removed the need for sunken continents. Dating methods, refined timelines. Mu did not adapt by narrowing. Instead, it shifted domains. It moved from geology to symbolism, from landmass to network, from human to extraterrestrial. This adaptability supports endurance. Mu changes shape without disappearing. When one claim fails, another replaces it. The core narrative remains intact. A first world existed. It was lost. Others inherited fragments. Online culture accelerates this process. Digital platforms favor compelling narratives over cautious explanation. Visual similarities are shared without context. Patterns are emphasized. Counter-arguments receive less attention. Algorithms reward engagement rather than accuracy. Communities form around shared interpretation. Within these groups, Mu becomes reinforced through repetition. Skepticism is framed as closed-mindedness. Alternative explanations are treated as suppression rather than disagreement. This dynamic strengthens belief. Mu also appeals to distrust of authority. Academic institutions are seen by some as gatekeepers. When archaeology rejects Mu, it is interpreted not as methodological caution, but as deliberate dismissal. The myth becomes a form of resistance. Extraterrestrial elements amplify this appeal. They connect Mu to broader questions about humanity's place in the universe. If humans were guided, then history is part of a larger story. Isolation becomes connection. Insignificance becomes participation. The myth persists because it accommodates wonder. It allows pyramids, temples, and symbols to feel mysterious rather than understood. Explanation removes awe. Mu preserves it. It keeps questions open rather than closed. Academic explanations often feel unsatisfying to non-specialists. Gradual development lacks drama. Independent invention lacks narrative unity. Mu provides a story with beginning, climax, and loss. It resembles myth because it functions as one. Importantly, Mu does not require belief in every detail to endure. One can reject the continent while accepting lost coastal cultures. One can reject extraterrestrials while accepting forgotten networks. Mu acts as umbrella rather than doctrine. This flexibility allows it to coexist with evidence without confronting it directly. It does not compete with archaeology on specific claims. It operates alongside, offering alternative meaning rather than alternative data. There is also an emotional dimension. The idea that modern humans descend from a forgotten high civilization flatters. It implies decline rather than ascent. Current limitations become temporary. Potential becomes remembered rather than imagined. At the same time, Mu expresses anxiety. If knowledge can be lost once, it can be lost again. The myth serves as warning. It reflects concern about fragility of civilization. Collapse is not hypothetical. It has precedent, even if symbolic. Education influences reception. Without familiarity with archaeological methods, it is difficult to evaluate claims critically. Patterns appear convincing without context. Chronology seems arbitrary. Mu thrives where methodological literacy is limited. Yet even among experts, Mu is rarely dismissed as mere fantasy. It is recognized as cultural artifact. It reveals how people relate to history, loss, and meaning. Studying why Mu persists becomes more informative than debating whether it existed. The myth also survives because it remains unanswered conclusively. Archaeology cannot prove a negative at global scale. It can only narrow probability. As long as some regions remain unexplored, speculation continues. Underwater archaeology, in particular, sustains interest. The ocean conceals landscapes once inhabited. Each new discovery renews imagination. Even when findings are modest, anticipation remains. Mu endures because it occupies a space between evidence and imagination that is unlikely to close completely. Deep time ensures permanent uncertainty. No archive is complete. No map is final. In this uncertainty, myths do important work. They organize memory. They assign meaning. They connect disparate experiences. Mu functions not as history, but as interpretation of history's absence. Whether Mu ever existed as described is less important to its endurance than what it represents. It represents origin without division, knowledge without loss, connection without isolation. As long as humans seek these qualities in their past, Mu will persist. It adapts to new contexts, new questions, and new technologies. It does not require proof to function. It remains a quiet presence beneath discussions of pyramids, symbols, and stars, not asserted as fact, but returned to repeatedly. A familiar shape in the unknown, between myth and memory, what Mu represents. Mu occupies an unusual position in discussions of deep history. It is presented as a place, yet functions more effectively as an idea. Its geography shifts, its timeline stretches, and its inhabitants change form depending on the needs of the narrative. This flexibility suggests that Mu is not sustained by evidence, but by meaning. It persists because it expresses something unresolved about humanity's relationship with its past. Recorded history begins late. Writing appears only after long periods of human activity. Before that threshold, memory is preserved through material traces and oral tradition. Both are incomplete. Archaeology recovers fragments. Oral histories reshape events through repetition. Between these forms of memory lies a gap where certainty dissolves. Mu emerges within this gap. As a concept, Mu gathers multiple uncertainties into one image. It stands in for unknown origins, unexplained skill, and sudden loss. Rather than asking how many separate developments occurred independently, Mu proposes a single beginning followed by dispersal. This does not simplify history in a factual sense, but it simplifies interpretation. Myth and memory are not opposites. They interact continuously. Memory degrades without structure. Myth provides that structure. It organizes events into sequences that can be remembered. In this way, myth preserves the outline of experience even when detail is lost. Mu can be understood as a myth built around memory of disruption. Environmental change offers a plausible foundation for this process. Rising seas, shifting climates, and regional collapse would have erased settlements and forced migration. Survivors would remember stability followed by loss. Over generations, this memory would detach from specific locations and attach to an abstract past. In this sense, Mu resembles other foundational myths. Atlantis, Eden, and the First Age all describe a prior state of completeness. They exist before division, before hardship, before decline. Their destruction explains present limitation. Humanity is framed not as emerging upward, but as falling away from something earlier. This framing contrasts with modern narratives of progress. Archaeology and evolutionary theory describe gradual accumulation. Knowledge builds through trial, error, and adaptation. There is no original completeness, only increasing complexity. Mu challenges this view by reversing direction. It suggests that complexity came first. The appeal of this reversal is psychological. It reframes difficulty as loss rather than failure. It places responsibility on circumstance rather than capacity. Humanity becomes heir rather than inventor. This perspective can be comforting, especially when modern systems feel fragile. Mu also functions as a response to specialization. Modern knowledge is fragmented across disciplines. No single person understands the whole. In contrast, Mu is imagined as unified. Science, architecture, and cosmology coexist within one culture. This unity reflects a longing for coherence rather than historical reality. Symbolism plays a key role here. Shared motifs across cultures are interpreted as memory traces rather than coincidence. Whether or not this interpretation is accurate, it reflects how humans use symbols to connect experiences across time and space. Symbols allow continuity where direct memory fails. From this perspective, Mu does not need to be literal to be influential. It operates as a container for questions archaeology cannot fully answer. Why do civilizations appear to rise quickly in some places? Why do certain forms repeat? Why does loss feel as prominent as creation in human history? Mu also reflects modern awareness of catastrophe. Climate change, natural disaster, and systemic collapse are present concerns. Projecting these anxieties into the past makes them feel less unprecedented. If collapse happened before, it can be survived again. The extraterrestrial dimension of Mu expands this symbolism further. It externalizes origin. Knowledge comes from elsewhere. Responsibility is shared. Humanity is part of a larger system rather than isolated. Whether or not this is factual, it addresses a desire for connection beyond Earth. This does not mean Mu is harmless. When myth is mistaken for evidence, it can obscure real history. It can diminish recognition of human ingenuity by attributing achievement to lost or external sources. It can flatten cultural diversity into a single narrative. However, when understood as symbolic, Mu reveals how humans process deep time. It shows how gaps in evidence invite narrative. It demonstrates how memory adapts to loss. It highlights the need for origin stories that make sense of fragmentation. Archaeology and myth operate on different levels. Archaeology reconstructs process. Myth constructs meaning. Conflict arises when these levels are confused. Mu becomes problematic when treated as data rather than metaphor. It becomes informative when treated as expression. The persistence of Mu suggests that factual explanation alone does not satisfy historical curiosity. People seek narrative coherence alongside accuracy. They want to know not only what happened, but what it means. Mu supplies meaning where evidence remains silent. This does not diminish the value of archaeology. It clarifies limits. It grounds speculation. It resists unfalsifiable claims. At the same time, archaeology cannot replace myth's function. It cannot answer every question of origin, purpose, or loss. Mu exists between these domains. It is not accepted history, but it is not arbitrary fiction. It is shaped by environmental reality, cultural memory, and modern imagination. Its endurance reflects unresolved tension between knowing and interpreting. As new discoveries emerge, Mu adapts. It absorbs coastal settlements, reinterprets migration, reframes symbols. It survives by remaining abstract. The more specific it becomes, the easier it is to test and dismiss. Abstraction protects it. This adaptability explains why Mu has not disappeared despite advances in science. It no longer claims a literal continent in the way early writers described. It now functions as network, influence, or symbolic ancestor. Each version preserves the core idea while shedding disproven details. In this way, Mu mirrors mythic systems throughout history. Myths survive by changing. They are not fixed records, they are living frameworks. Mu continues because it responds to current questions using ancient language. Understanding Mu as representation rather than record allows it to be placed without conflict. It becomes a lens rather than a claim. Through it, people explore uncertainty, loss, and continuity without requiring verification. Between myth and memory lies interpretation. Mu inhabits that space. It is shaped by what is missing rather than what is found. It reflects how humans confront deep time with limited tools. Whether Mu ever existed as described may never be resolved. The ocean conceals evidence. Time erodes certainty. But its symbolic role is clear. It stands for a remembered absence, a sense that something once connected humanity more completely than now. In this role, Mu is not unique. It is one of many constructs that emerge when history extends beyond reach. It differs only in scale and persistence. As archaeology continues to refine timelines and contexts, Mu will likely retreat further into symbolism, yet it will not vanish. It will remain as long as questions about beginnings outpace answers. Between what can be proven and what can be imagined, Mu holds its place, not as destination, but as reflection. The pyramids revisited, inheritance or innovation. Pyramids stand at the center of many arguments about lost origins. They are large, durable, and visually similar across continents. Stone rising in measured layers appears in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, South America, and parts of Asia. These structures endure long after the societies that built them. Because they survive so well, they attract interpretation. In Egypt, pyramids are most closely associated with the Old Kingdom. The earliest large stone pyramid, built for Djoser at Saqqara around 2630 BCE, marked a shift from mastaba tombs to vertical monumentality. Over the next century, pyramid construction evolved rapidly. The bent pyramid shows experimentation. The red pyramid shows refinement. This sequence is well documented archaeologically. Quarry marks, worker settlements, tools, and unfinished structures reveal process. The pyramids were not dropped into history fully formed. They reflect trial, error, and adaptation. Mainstream archaeology views this progression as evidence of local innovation. Alternative interpretations focus less on sequence and more on outcome. The Great Pyramid aligns closely with cardinal directions. Its proportions reflect specific ratios. Its internal layout appears intentional rather than symbolic. These qualities are presented as too advanced for their time. In this view, Egypt accessed knowledge already complete. Similar debates surround pyramids in the Americas. In Mesoamerica, pyramids served as ceremonial platforms rather than tombs. Structures at Teotihuacan, Tikal, and Chichen Itza were built over centuries, often expanded layer by layer. Alignments with solar and planetary cycles are documented. Construction methods differ significantly from Egypt, relying on rubble cores and plastered surfaces. Mu-based interpretations emphasize form over function. They argue that pyramidal shape itself indicates inheritance. According to this view, different uses represent adaptation of a shared design. Critics counter that pyramidal forms are structurally efficient. They distribute weight evenly and allow height without advanced materials. Independent societies could arrive at similar solutions. Chronology complicates inheritance claims. Egyptian pyramids predate those in the Americas by more than 2,000 years. If knowledge traveled from a single source, it did so unevenly and with long delay. Supporters attribute this to fragmentation and loss. Critics see it as evidence against direct transmission. Geography also matters. Egyptian pyramids are built from limestone blocks quarried nearby. American pyramids use local stone, adobe, or volcanic material. Construction techniques reflect available resources. Tool marks show regional variation. No shared engineering signature has been identified. Astronomical alignment is often presented as a unifying feature. The Great Pyramid's alignment to true north is exceptionally precise. Some Mesoamerican pyramids align with equinox sunsets or Venus cycles. These alignments are not identical in method or purpose. Each reflects local cosmology. Mu narratives interpret this shared attention to the sky as inherited instruction. They suggest that pyramids functioned as observatories, energy devices, or markers of planetary knowledge. Archaeology treats alignment as ritual and calendrical, tied to agriculture and state religion. Energy-based interpretations have gained popularity in modern discourse. Claims that pyramids generate or focus energy lack empirical support. Measurements inside pyramids do not show anomalies beyond environmental variation. These ideas persist, largely through repetition rather than testing. Labor organization provides another lens. Egyptian pyramids were built by large workforces supported by centralized state systems. Evidence of housing, food distribution, and medical care has been found. This indicates social complexity rather than technological mystery. In the Americas, pyramid construction was also labor-intensive and community-based. Construction often coincided with ritual cycles. Expansion reflected political change. These patterns suggest social motivation rather than inherited blueprint. One consistent feature across regions is symbolic elevation. Pyramids elevate ritual space above ordinary ground. They create separation between sacred and profane. Mountains carry similar symbolism worldwide. Where natural mountains are absent or insufficient, artificial ones are built. This symbolic explanation accounts for convergence without inheritance. It does not require contact or shared origin. It requires only shared human perception of height, visibility, and sacred space. Still, the question persists because pyramids feel deliberate beyond necessity. They require planning beyond immediate survival. They reflect surplus, organization, and belief. For those seeking a unifying past, pyramids become anchors. Mu functions here as connective tissue. It links pyramids across space and time. It explains similarity through memory rather than coincidence. It replaces multiple origins with one. Archaeology resists this replacement because it obscures difference. Egyptian pyramids serve funerary ideology centered on kingship and afterlife. Mesoamerican pyramids serve cyclical ritual tied to deities and calendars. Their meanings are not interchangeable. Innovation does not require isolation. Societies observe one another indirectly through migration and trade. Ideas travel without continents sinking or civilizations vanishing. Influence can be diffuse and partial. The record supports local development shaped by environment, belief, and social structure. Where similarities exist, they reflect shared constraints and symbolic tendencies. Where differences exist, they are substantial. Inheritance models struggle to explain these differences without invoking degradation. Every mismatch becomes loss. This framing reduces explanatory power. It allows any outcome to fit the model. Innovation models accept unevenness. They expect variation. They allow for complexity without unity. They do not require a vanished source. The pyramids themselves do not speak. They are interpreted. Meaning is assigned through context. When context is removed, form dominates. Mu-based readings often isolate form from context. When pyramids are returned to their cultural settings, they align with known practices. Construction techniques match available tools. Symbolism matches local cosmology. Labor matches social organization. This does not remove mystery entirely. Some aspects remain debated. Construction logistics, workforce management, and symbolic detail continue to be studied. Mystery does not imply external origin. The enduring fascination with pyramids reflects their scale and silence. They do not explain themselves. They invite projection. Mu is one such projection. Inheritance and innovation are not mutually exclusive in general history. Cultures inherit ideas and innovate upon them. Evidence supports inheritance through contact, not inheritance from a global first world. Pyramids show that humans repeatedly chose monumentality. They invested resources in structures that outlasted generations. This choice reflects values rather than instruction. Mu reframes this choice as memory. Archaeology frames it as decision. The difference matters because it shapes how human capability is understood. Innovation emphasizes adaptation and creativity. Inheritance emphasizes decline and loss. The archaeological record favors the first interpretation. It shows humans solving problems repeatedly under different conditions. Similar solutions emerge without shared origin. The pyramids, viewed through this lens, are not echoes of a forgotten world. They are independent answers to shared human questions about death, order, and the sky. Yet Mu persists because pyramids remain emotionally unresolved. They feel too large, too old, too quiet. They resist final explanation. As long as pyramids stand, they will invite origin stories that extend beyond evidence. Mu will remain one of those stories, returning whenever innovation feels insufficient. The debate between inheritance and innovation continues, not because evidence is equal, but because meaning is not. What remains when the first world fades? When Mu is set aside as a literal place, something still remains. Questions do not disappear with it. The absence that Mu once filled does not close. It shifts. What remains is not a continent, a civilization, or a vanished people, but a pattern in how humans confront deep time and incomplete knowledge. Archaeology shows that human history is layered rather than linear. Development does not move uniformly forward. It advances, stalls, fragments, and reconfigures. Skills appear, disappear, and reappear in different forms. Stoneworking improves, declines, and improves again. Social organization expands and contracts. This unevenness is not failure, it is adaptation. When viewed this way, the loss of knowledge does not require a single catastrophic event or a lost global system. Loss occurs repeatedly at smaller scales. A river shifts and a town is abandoned. A climate cools and crops fail. A trade route collapses and skills tied to it fade. Over time, these local losses accumulate into broader gaps. What remains visible are durable choices. Stone lasts longer than wood. Monumental construction survives where everyday life vanishes. Ritual spaces endure where domestic ones erode. This skews perception. The past appears dominated by temples and tombs because those are what remain, not because they were all that existed. Myth emerges from this imbalance. When daily life disappears but monuments remain, explanation fills the void. Stories attach to structures. Origins are assigned. Memory reconstructs meaning from fragments. This process is not deception. It is sense-making. Mu represents one form of this sense-making. It gathers loss into a single narrative. It provides an origin that explains absence. When that narrative is removed, the need for explanation remains. Archaeology answers some questions, but not all. What remains, then, is human creativity under constraint. Across continents, people shaped stone, tracked stars, organized labor, and encoded belief. They did so independently, responding to local environments and shared human concerns. The similarities that emerge reflect cognition as much as contact. Humans everywhere respond to the sky. The sun governs time. The moon marks cycles. Stars orient travel and ritual. Aligning structures to celestial events does not require inherited instruction. It requires observation over time. Patience replaces mystery. Humans everywhere respond to death. Burial practices, memorials, and monuments arise to address loss. Elevation, permanence, and symmetry convey order in the face of impermanence. Pyramids and mounds answer emotional needs as much as practical ones. Humans everywhere respond to power. Monumental architecture organizes labor and displays authority. It signals continuity beyond individual lifespans. Rulers invest in structures that outlast them, because endurance legitimizes rule. This motivation appears repeatedly, without shared origin. When the idea of a first world fades, what remains is multiplicity. Many beginnings rather than one, many experiments rather than a single template. History becomes less tidy, but more realistic. This multiplicity challenges preference for unified origin stories. It replaces certainty with complexity. It accepts that similar outcomes can arise from different paths. It acknowledges that innovation does not always leave clear traces. It also restores agency. Human societies are no longer inheritors of lost perfection. They are active problem solvers. They build, forget, rebuild, and reinterpret. Loss is part of creation, not evidence of decline from a higher state. Myth still has a role here. It preserves values, not data. It expresses how societies understand their place in time. Mu, Atlantis, and other lost worlds articulate concern about fragility. They warn that stability is temporary. They remind that memory can vanish. In this sense, Mu does not need to be true to be meaningful. It reflects awareness that much of the past is inaccessible. It expresses humility in the face of time. It acknowledges that human records are incomplete. Archaeology complements this awareness by setting boundaries. It clarifies what can be supported. It resists narratives that collapse diversity into simplicity. It accepts uncertainty without replacing it with speculation. When Mu fades, archaeology does not replace it with a single alternative story. It offers many partial ones. Each site adds context. Each discovery refines understanding. The picture grows more detailed, but never complete. This incompleteness is not a flaw, it is inherent. Time removes information faster than it preserves it. No method can recover everything. Some questions will remain unanswered. What remains, then, is a dialogue between evidence and imagination. Imagination proposes. Evidence constrains. Together, they shape understanding. Problems arise when one dominates the other. Setting aside Mu as literal history allows its symbolic function to be recognized without distorting evidence. It becomes a way of thinking about loss rather than a claim about the past. This reframing reduces conflict while preserving curiosity. Curiosity is what ultimately remains. The desire to understand how people lived, thought, and organized themselves long before written records. This desire drives excavation, analysis, and debate. It does not require a first world to sustain it. As research continues, new discoveries will shift timelines and challenge assumptions. Coastal archaeology will expand. Genetic studies will refine migration models. Remote sensing will reveal hidden structures. Each advance will replace some questions and raise others. If a unified prehistoric system ever existed, it would need evidence commensurate with its scale. Until then, the record supports regional development shaped by shared human constraints rather than global inheritance. The fading of Mu does not diminish the past. It makes it more intricate. It reveals a history built from many starts, interruptions, and recoveries. It emphasizes resilience rather than decline. What remains is not a lost civilization, but a species repeatedly capable of organizing complexity under changing conditions. Humans do not need extraterrestrial tutors or vanished continents to explain this capacity. Time and adaptation suffice. At the same time, the persistence of Mu shows that explanation alone does not satisfy. Meaning matters. Stories endure because they address emotional and existential questions evidence cannot resolve. Between what can be proven and what can be felt, history unfolds. The first world fades, but the impulse to imagine it does not. It transforms, reappearing in new forms as new unknowns emerge. What remains, finally, is silence. Stone without inscription, alignments without explanation, gaps between dates. This silence invites both discipline and wonder. Archaeology listens carefully. Myth listens differently. Both respond to what is missing. When Mu fades, the past does not become empty, it becomes open. We've reached the quiet edge of the story, where evidence ends and interpretation begins. Whether Mu was ever a real place or simply a reflection of what has been lost, the questions it raises remain part of how we understand deep history. If you found this exploration meaningful, take a moment to like the video. It helps these long, careful documentaries continue. Subscribe if you'd like to join us for future episodes focused on forgotten history, ancient worlds, and unanswered questions. And if there's a topic you'd like us to explore next, you can share it in the comments. Until then, thank you for listening, and rest well.